Two people you may know somewhat, and you'll know a lot more after this weekend. Hriman, he, Padma, she, are the spiritual directors of Seattle. They have been there. They went to Seattle, I don't know, a year or two before Ash and I came down here.
After.
Right? You went after?
93.
Yeah. Oh, they're just
kids.
We're just getting started. So they've done a fantastic colony there with all the different accoutrements and bells and whistles and
umbrellas.
What was that? Umbrellas. As we do in Palo Alto, we have drawn a lot of inspiration and ideas from them, and maybe they've drawn an idea or two from us, but it's been great having them there, and they've really done a spectacular job, and obviously they are long-time devotees to have spent that much time in a leadership situation, and Swamiji sent them to Seattle, and he hasn't called them back.
Yet.
But I don't know if they're waiting for the call or not, but they're there. So we're very fortunate to have you both with us.
It's so like when the music stops and Swami leaves his body, do we all have to stay where he had us? I hope not.
You know, for many years we would tell people they sent us to Siberia, and then in recent years we hear from Dharmadas that he's going to Siberia. So we're up north somewhere.
Okay, let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, beloved friend, Swamiji, guide us to the center of our being, to the awareness of your presence within. Guide us with your joy, your wisdom, your love, your creativity, and your harmony. Om Shanti. Amen.
Let's chant and just do a few minutes of meditation.
I want only thee,
So let's be still for just a few moments, putting aside the week behind us, going within ourselves. When my thoughts go to rest, that's the time I see you best. 'Tis lovely sitting in the silence. Let us be still and know our oneness, our communion through our gurus to the Great Spirit. Let us be still. Shanti. Amen. Thank you all for coming. This is wonderful for us. How many of you have actually ever been to Seattle? Oh, quite a few. Okay. Well, you know, you have a train running through your community. But I didn't think that was that funny, but
maybe that's how we were going to get to Seattle.
We have airplanes going over ours. There's an airport, not the main airport, but just a mile or two north of us, where commercial flights will begin this year. So, and they build the large 787 just up the road from us, and these very large transport planes come from Japan, bearing inside of themselves the body of the 787. And when they come over our community, it's like your train, basically. So, well. I grew up in Pacific Grove. Anyone know where that is? You know, when we land here, and of course we spent many, many years raising our children at Ananda Village, and I'm from California, but when we come here from Seattle, truly, the light is very different here. And I tell my friends in Seattle, being from California, that it's without a question that you all in California have sunnier personalities. And up there where it's gray and overcast all the time, you'll find Seattleites are a bit reserved until you talk to them, and then they smile. So something to this climate business.
Scorpios, you might say.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, we thought we would start just touching a little bit on community, and I wanted to share, when I speak of community, I'm not just talking the residential community, I'm talking about the whole Sangha. And when we were first asked to go to Seattle, it was 1993, so 24 years ago. And when we landed there, they were in actually, at that point they were in a rented, it wasn't even a storefront, it was, well, let me tell you the story. When we got there, Hriman went a few weeks ahead of me to check things out. And then I came, and he was going to show me the center. And it was in an office building that was just, you know, off a side street somewhere in Shoreline. It was, not even Seattle, a suburb. And we go into the office building, and there's an elevator, and he hits B for basement. And I looked at that, and I said, this is going to change right now. We're not going down to our center. But that's where it was when we got there. And we very shortly after that, the lease went up by the grace of God, and we were able to move, and we moved the center near to where our East-West bookshop up there was. And we used to call that area the metaphysical belt of Seattle. So we moved up to that area, and just to say it, we do have a sister store there, East-West. In Seattle, just like East-West here is technically owned by Ananda or Ananda members. We actually separately incorporated it, but it is our sister store. So we were very happy to hear that our other sister is still alive and kicking. Yay. But anyway, things were small, and at the time, and things were financially struggling at the time. And one of the first things we realized is that in their financial struggles, they'd forgotten to tithe. So we started tithing again, and that helped start to turn things around. But in any case, we realized that we needed to do a lot of outreach to reach new people. And through East West, being right across the street from it, we had a fabulous opportunity to reach a lot of new people. And we also had a solid core, but it was small, of people, and we needed to develop and give them things to go deeper with. So Hriman concentrated on the outreach. I concentrated on helping to sort of deepen the spiritual lives of the Kriyabans and those who wanted to go deeper and lived in the community. And what we did, we really meditated on it, each in our own ways, his for the outreach, me for the other. And what I realized, we had just come up from Ananda Village, and what we had there for 20 plus years before moving to Seattle was a fully integrated spiritual life. You know, you live on the 900 acres or whatever it was, you have your work, you have your home, you have your friends, you have your social life, you have your church life, you have your everything life. It's right there, it's fully integrated. And when you're in the city, and this is why I bring it up, because you all are in the city, and I know you can relate to this shared experience, it's a little more scattered, and people live in different places, and they, even if they live in the community, they might work in different settings and corporations and all these kinds of things. So trying to tune into the experience that we wanted to have them to have, that deeper sort of continuity in their lives. We hearkened back to something we had done at the village and been a part of, which was these weekly satsang groups. And so we started doing that. When we first started, it was weekly, and it still is 7 months out of the year. And the fourth week of every month is a Kriya meditation. And so we started with maybe a dozen core members who really wanted to participate in that. And the only prerequisite was being a Kriyaban. And now it's well over 100 people that are participating in those every week. But the point is, it grew. What happened is that it gave people an opportunity outside of church on Sunday to come together, to be in the vibration together, to study the teachings together, to serve together, to chant together. You know, we had a fully integrated program, and I'm not going to go into the details of that, and I think you guys are doing some of that now too. But the point was, it was with a conscious effort to try to recreate that community experience that we had had for decades before at Ananda Village. And it really has worked. There are some people who've been doing it now for 24 years with us from the beginning. There's a good, 30, 40 people that have been doing it for close to that time. And then there's many middle grounders and 10 years and 5 years, and then a lot of new ones coming in with each fresh batch of Kriyabans. So, and people go in and out of it. If they have to be inactive for a while, they're inactive if they can't participate fully. And then when they want to come back, they say they want to come back, and that happens a lot. It has a very natural flow to it. So that was one way, that was really the key way we had for creating that sense of community with the entire Sangha and not only the residents. So I just wanted to share that piece. And then,
when I first came to Ananda Village, which at the time that's all there was, I had already traveled to India and this and that, and at the time, maybe like some of you, I was very attracted to Master, to Kriya, and to the path. But when I saw all those crazy hippies at the time, and I was maybe a little bit part of them, I wasn't so sure about this whole communities thing, you know. And I think a lot of us who are attracted to the path and meditation have some samskars that are in the direction of maybe we were hermits or what have you in some past lives. And so I wasn't so sure about that. And then I'd read, or Swamiji would say, oh, Master said these would spread like wildfire. And I said, I hope there's no more wildfires. We had one just recently, and it didn't come out so well. So, you know, the whole thing, I will admit, didn't really add up for me, other than Swamiji himself and the path itself. And I think many of us in this room, in our Ananda communities, wherever they may be, seeing current events in the last couple of years, and even if society at large may still consider what we're doing, both at large but also in our aspect of communities, as uninteresting to them, irrelevant perhaps, I think many of us now see what Master was talking about the importance of people coming together consciously to support one another spiritually. Whether that's a physical residential community or a virtual sangha isn't really so important, but the need and the impulse to come together. I remember I had just spent a year traveling up and down India, and when I came back, and because I didn't know about Master at the time, I likened myself to Dorothy and Toto. I had to come back to find my home. And, okay, so you don't know who Dorothy and Toto are. I'll tell you, what do you teach these people? But he said, you know, someday America and India would lead the world in certain ways. I won't go into that. But at the time, even though I myself was quite tuned into India, I looked around my America, so to speak, and I said, you kidding? But look what's happened in many of our lifetimes. Everything Indian, from food to fashion to politics to obviously spirituality, but that's so obvious, why mention it? Everything India now is on every street corner, so to speak. And if you'd have told me that in the 70s, even having been there, I would not have believed you. And so we see that the things that he talked about are beginning to happen. And over the years, and living in the community there and so forth, I've come to realize, as Swami would often say, and I know David and Asha and others of you have often said to one another, is that a time will come when the community's idea will be one of the most important things that took place during this period of history. Most of us in this room will probably never see the fruition of that. But the idea, I mean, look at our communities, look at the room. The idea that people from different nations and backgrounds and social economic groups can live together in harmony sounds like, okay, fine, but you ever read the news these days? How many of you have tuned out the news in the last year or so? Okay, right, so see, you're not up to date. But no, seriously, you can see that, you know, we live in Satya Yuga. That's the truth of it. With our ideals, the way we treat one another. But you don't have to go very far to find that a lot of the world is in Kali Yuga. I mean, you all know that. But because we live to a large extent with one another, it's easy to forget that this consciousness that we represent, and I don't mean that exclusively, there's millions of people like us, but here we are, so we're talking about what we're doing. But nonetheless, it needs to change, and without people like ourselves and others giving a living example of how to be in this world in harmony, I'm not so sure we're going to make it. I don't want to talk about future things. I know all of you know all that sort of thing, but I was one of those on that front too. When Swami would talk about master predictions, I'd just be in the back room with Ananda McSweeney, if you know who that is, and shaking my head and just, you know, oh sure, Swami, you know, right. But I see it now. I see the challenges that lie ahead for society, and I see the value of what we're doing. You know, we had that Be the Change thing last year, and we need to believe that. We need to believe that what we're doing is relevant, and I see it now. I mean, not just now, but in the last many years. We need to encourage one another, because what we're doing is valuable, not only to ourselves, okay, for sure, spiritually, but also our example for many other people. So why don't we kind of open it up and see what people want to talk about?
Anybody have any questions or comments for Padma and Hriman?
The coffee in Seattle is a lot better than here.
Now that we can talk about.
There's one back there.
You said that when you first came to the village, you liked the path and you liked Swami and you were wondering about everybody else. But how did you change, or what changed for you so that you became part of the community? You started feeling like you were part of the community.
Well, I think like a lot of us in this room and so on, when you start down to make a commitment spiritually, whether it's discipleship or whatever, there's a certain knowing in your heart. The example I often use is people who go to the altar in marriage, okay? Some people go confidently, but it doesn't work. Some people go with a lot of reservations, and it does work. And so, me, like many of you, when I went there, I wanted to be part of the community. Didn't mean I didn't have doubts or questions, but inside here, I knew it was right. I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I knew it was right. That's really all Swami would say, and this was after the fire at Ananda Village in a year or two, and he'd lay around, oh, what a beautiful place, and I'd look around and say, oh my God, are you kidding? You know, and I had had a long history before that of backpacking in Asia and Europe and America, and I love the high country. So when I got to Ananda Village, oh God, it's hot, it's dusty, and you know, it just didn't resonate. But it didn't matter. I knew here that this was my home, and this is where I belonged. And I put all that other stuff, like Swami would say about the miracle on page 6 in the autobiography, I just put all that stuff on the shelf. It was of less importance. And haven't we all done some of that at some point? I mean, the life of the spiritual life, if it's anything at all, is a life of faith. And that means to move through your commitments, your spiritual commitments, not knowing what the outcome is going to be, whether you think yourself worthy, unworthy, all those sorts of things. Something inside you compels you to move in that direction, and the rational mind is not of much value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it might have been one of the things that attracted us to one another, but I had a similar experience when I first came.
Oh, is that what it was?
That's what it was. Our love of Swami, love of the path, and not so sure about the other people and community part. But what did it for me was being there long enough, sticking it out long enough, you know, just like meditating long enough, being there long enough to begin to experience how important the lessons of ego transcendence. I began to see how important community was to our ego transcendence. By being with one another and rubbing egos with one another, and doing so consciously, supportively, that is to say, we know our intention is to be ego transcendent, even though we are not all the time, or we wouldn't be on this plane. But having a community of people, like a family, that you can trust and feel supported in that direction. And by supported, I don't mean coddled. I mean supported towards my ego transcendence. I remember one time, this is just sort of funny, but in the very beginning, I remember talking to my friend Anandi, who many of you might know. And this is like we're in our early 20s, you know. And she said, Padma, when we grow old together here, she said, if you ever catch me playing bridge, shoot me, okay? But you know, just having a lot of friends that you're surrounded by who know that you don't want to be coddled, that you want spiritual freedom, that you want God in this lifetime, just like Master urges us to do. And then I began to really understand the value of community and began to love it. Yeah.
Can you talk about, excuse me, your Hatha Yoga program and just how you integrate that? And, I mean, anything you can say about like what you do and how it works in the community.
All right.
And
Well, as
Why are you interested?
Why are you interested?
She's the director of our yoga.
She's the director.
Oh,
She's their director.
I know,
Okay.
Have you heard of or met Murli Vamkatrao from Bangalore?
no.
Okay. Well, let's dial it back a little bit. In Ananda's history, and given Swamiji teaching Hatha Yoga in the early days, and it wasn't very long after Ananda was started that he pretty much, you know, stopped doing that. And we all know that Prakriyaban's master said Hatha Yoga was optional, right? And for that and probably other reasons, in the early years of Ananda, Hatha Yoga was something of a stepbrother or stepsister, a kind of an orphan, if you will. Yet over the years, and long before these communities existed, at the same time as that, Hatha was a big factor in what supported our retreat, which later became the Expanding Light. It's always been there. And what's been happening, and this is more my opinion than anything, but what's been happening since, let's call it Gyandev's coming on the scene back whenever that was. Okay, I don't remember the dates anymore. He had a few predecessors, including Jyotishan Devi long before. But anyway, we'll call it Gyandev. When in Seattle we had Willow Kushler come on board and Surendra. How many here remember Surendra and Tushti? Okay, and Tushti and Willow were sort of like soulmates in Hatha. The program began to develop a magnetism around it. And of course, even in my day coming, Hatha was always a big front door for people to come to Ananda. So it's always had a role, but it's had this sort of half relationship. But in more recent years, and what we're seeing is that its integration into the path for people, not just as a front door. As the rest of society, as millions or more are doing Hatha Yoga, they're, as you all know, they're discovering things about themselves and etc. And it's awakening them to the other. And this sort of bifurcated thing is starting to dissolve. It's now, like Gyandev's book, he even called it spiritual yoga. Now, to me, that's redundant, and I wouldn't have named it that, but it does say what's going on. And what's going on is that Hatha is beginning to come up and be recognized as part of a spiritual practice. Okay? And that integration is very much happening in Seattle, with meditation at the end of postures, which, you know, is nothing new to anyone here, but to the world at large. The integration is really beginning to happen seamlessly. Another thing that we began to introduce in concert with Gyandev was the integration of energization. You know, this is my own opinion, but But to me, for many years, energization is our answer to, I don't know, vinyasa or the sort of energetic quality of our society that needs that kind of stimulation. And so we've been integrating energization into hatha, as well as integrating it at the other end into raja, if you will, into meditation. So then when Willow moved, Murli Venkatrao, who is a high position Microsoft executive type fellow, the guy's a genius, but he's born and raised in a Brahmin family, highly educated in the Shastras, etc. Came to Ananda, I don't know when that was, but anyway, he came to Ananda, and he's helping to put Ananda Yoga on the map of the lineages of yoga worldwide, because he has access to and is discovering. See, we don't know where Master got any of his postures. We barely know what Master said to Swami. But he's going back behind those traditions, and he gives a wonderful workshop in which he said he goes through the history all the way back to the Yoga Sutras and all these other things, and he shows that at one time there were 2 yoga postures, and then there were 4, and then there were 12, and then there were 16, and now there's 200 and some, because its original integration into meditation was much more seamless, and it's beginning to come back to that. So when he started that and began our YTT, our yoga teacher training, then he began integrate. In other words, our students are not separate. We took a whole bunch of them to India last year, just yoga students, not disciples, not Kriyavans. Guess what happened? So we're seeing an increasing integration between the 2 parts of the whole, and that's very exciting to us. I probably didn't answer anything you asked.
You answered it beautifully. Thank you.
I've been thinking lately much more about the importance of asking the right question anytime certain solutions need to be made on certain projects. And I was wondering if you had a core number of questions that you always refer to make sure that you're always asking the right question in a given circumstance. What's the most appropriate kinds of questions?
Padma asks all the questions, but before she does, you know, Patanjali did not have a sense of humor, right? I mean, if you're okay. But there's one line in the whole 200 or whatever sutras when he actually showed an inkling of a sense of humor. He said one of the problems with spiritual obstacles is missing the point. Padma?
Thank you. You know, a lot of times I get people coming for counseling, more and more these days, and as the Sangha is growing, and they come with a lot of questions. But the most important question they forget to ask is, what does God want in this circumstance? So I ask myself, I always ask myself, what would Master do? And more relevant to me, because I lived it, what would Swami do or have done or have said in these circumstances? And most of the time people forget to ask that question. And from that question, everything else, you know, the water sort of flows downhill. They're unhappy in their life. They want to make a change. They forget to ask, should I make a change? And if so, how can I serve you, Master? How can I serve you, God? Instead of, what do I want to do? You know, we just get so wrapped up in the normal questions that life sort of drives us to, that we forget to ask that first and most important question.
Do you remember Master's quote that you always say about people don't ask the right? Padma once found somewhere some research, a very interesting quote of Master, and it's not coming to me fully, but it goes like this. He says, most people, even in their spiritual service, you mentioned the word projects, that's what I picked up on.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to say it?
Even when they have the divine calling, the divine inspiration, they don't know how to do it divinely. They very quickly revert to their own planning process, even if they had the initial correct inspiration. And it's something he said to Rajasi in one of his letters to Rajasi. And so it's very, very tricky. And he talked about that. The context he was talking to Rajasi in was when Yogananda, Master, went back to India in 1935-36, and he thought he was looking to build a new headquarters, to start a new headquarters in this certain location, and he went looking for the spot, the location, and he ended up in a completely different town, in a completely different city, in a completely different location, realizing that Divine Mother had something else in mind. He eventually found that and figured it out, and that's when he was saying to Rajasi, even when we have that divine inspiration, we forget to act on it in a divine way, and we revert back to our own plotting and planning. So, does that help? Yeah.
When to act on it in a divine way would be to have some, like, test in your mind about whether you're acting in a divine way. I was just thinking if you're continually forcing your old idea instead of when something gets blocked, then you look around. Can you talk more about acting in your own divine way?
Acting in a divine way means constantly asking. It means, for each decision, for each moment of departure in whatever the direction is that you're feeling divinely inspired to keep asking, because if you start planning, if your planning process takes over, which is natural for most people, you might be going straight when you're supposed to be turning right, or you're supposed to be turning left because you weren't listening along the way. It's all part of how to develop your intuition.
I'll give an example. I'm not sure I should, but I will. I always do. Alfred and I, over the years, and David also, have talked a lot about, because ours were the first two urban community apartments that were bought. And there came a time in Seattle's history when we needed to change things a great deal. And there was that feeling with us that it was the right thing to do, and that it wasn't coming from personal desire or animosity or whatever, the usual things. And yet there was a lot of that kind of kerfluffle in the process of what we did. Now, it's true that we received an endorsement from Swamiji, but as I'll confess readily, we would have done it anyway. There was a conviction that it was right, even if in appearance it would have appeared to have been personal. And even in the process, when there were emotions. So there are sometimes on the spiritual path when you're confronted with your karma, with your dharma, but without that inner conviction that is qualitatively different than what happens when you maybe are attached or angry or reactive. And only by meditation and intuition can you know the difference. But when that calm inner feeling has been developed, not in crises, but in day-to-day living, by always asking, then you take those steps, and sometimes, regardless of how you are viewed or the possible consequences of it. For people at large, it might mean coming on, let's say, this spiritual path at the expense of their family's goodwill or their spouse. How many times do we have to see that? Not being supported. But if you have that inner conviction that it is right, and you've developed that over years of living the spiritual path, and of course I don't need to give examples how Swami did this so often, but he certainly did. That's the life of faith. Then you sort of have to live by that. You have to be willing, and sometimes that takes courage if it's an outward thing, but it almost always takes some kind of courage. So it's an inner feeling, born of intuition, but you have to develop that and always be very careful about it, especially when other people's welfare is at stake. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I've heard you can tell when it's your ego because you get all excited and...
That's right.
And so if you have this calmness, you make a decision, and then you just start proceeding. And it's not like you even stay with the decision, you're already moving ahead, and even when people are objecting, you're moving ahead, you're not defending your decision that you made 2 days ago or whatever. It's kind of like that, I'll bet.
Yeah.
Depends on what it is. Sometimes you do have to heed people's feedback and take it into account. You just have to take one step at a time and keep asking Master inwardly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're too close to ourselves. It's good to get feedback. Swamiji would always ask different ones of us for feedback constantly, and it wasn't because we were so bright. It was partly because he was training us how to do that, but it's an important thing to do, and I do it now when I have to make important decisions. I ask people I trust spiritually. I'll ask a few different ones and make sure I get resonant responses, and if I don't, I go back into meditation with it. I may be right, but you know, I need more sort of proof before taking the risk of making a big egoic error. Yeah.
It's a good one. Wow. You know, we were around in 1981 when your East-West was acquired. And that was an adventure for Padma and I because it was all done from Ananda village. And of course we didn't know anything about anything.
David and Asha weren't here yet.
Yeah. And you know, the woman who owned the old... Anybody here ever been to the old Atherton? Oh my goodness, you people have been around a long time. Okay. Well, very good. What's her name? Scharfman?
Virginia.
Virginia Scharfman. And offered the store to Swamiji, and he didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He comes back to the village and announces to us that lo and behold, somebody just donated, what was it, $45,000?
$37,500.
$37,515. Enough for the down payment. It wasn't easy. We sure didn't know what we were doing then, and sometimes I'm not sure we know what we're doing now. But
we're having fun.
We fake it better.
Any other thoughts or?
We have a living wisdom school, don't we? Have you ever been to our school?
I haven't yet. I would love to.
Yeah.
We'd love you to visit.
I would love to come and see.
We got a tour today of the school. It's just
good.
You know, I walked into the junior high thing upstairs with Gary, and I have never in my life seen such happy junior high aged kids. It was look you straight in the eye and say, "Hi, how are you?" And I was like bowled over. It's just wonderful.
You know, there's when I visit Ananda Assisi or Ananda in India, it's more obviously in your face to see people from all over the world in Assisi and in India, you know, to see all the devotees in India. And you meet them, and there's just this, you're family, and you just know each other, and you're meeting them for the first time, but it's as if you've known each other all your life. Well, here in America too, the cross-pollination, you know, visiting you all, talking with Shanti and Asha and talking with Helen today at the school, there's so many fun ideas we can share with each other, the things that we've tried that are working, the things that we've tried that aren't working. You know, there's just so much we can share and gain from each other. I know the teachers get together for an EFL conference every year from all the schools, and they come together and share in those ways, and it's so incredibly valuable. And, you know, sometimes just to bring people around to pilgrimages even domestically here would be a very fun thing to do, because there's so much creativity that can come from that.
I know there are people here already planning on going up to Seattle.
Yeah.
When Jyotish and Devi, now that's a great,
that's right. Yes.
that's a great opportunity. Everyone's encouraged to try to go to as many of those, and that's a perfect way to do it, really. Yeah.
I think it was 1994 when Padma and I toured the existing centers. We came here.
When we were first asked to
We were
do
first
that.
asked to go there, and it's not like we didn't know anything, but still we wanted to go to the existing centers and see how they all operated, and we learned a lot.
I stole most of Asha's promo materials in the first several years. I mean, why write it when it's already been done for you, right? Yeah.
I stole every brochure from your church office here today. And
I asked Helen to record her big tea and talks that she gives to parents and things. We need to share those things.
Yeah.
The more we can share with
And
each
some
other,
people
the
like
better.
Helen have invaluable, 30 years experience that, we have a brand new director in our school. She could benefit so much from learning from her. So,
Yeah.
And you may not know it, but you're sharing with your yoga satsang groups. I mean,
Kriya Satsang.
Kriya satsang groups has just made a huge difference in our entire experience of our
Which wasn't,
our lives here.
you got to know that was all happening at the village before we moved, which was long before the lawsuits and all the things that hit Ananda Village and made it need to pay attention to other things, and so that it got lost even at the village. They've restarted it there, and but that's where it all came from originally. Yeah. We're like those monks that, the Irish monks that
Keep the truth going.
keep the teaching, passing it on.
Could you say a few words about what you feel each of us, wherever we are, what is it that we bring, those qualities or behaviors that help the community feel really together, that help it grow, that help it prosper? I mean, each of us as individuals on our path, really working our way to finding God, but how is it that we contribute to community?
The one thing I've seen, with no emphasis on I mean one sees on the spiritual path, is that is sort of fatal spiritually. I mean, the good news is we have satsang. Environment is stronger than will. But what's the dark side? The dark side is we compare ourselves to other people constantly. And the one thing I've seen...
What is the dark side? Is comparing ourselves to other people.
And the one thing I've seen that undermines our ability to be who we are, I remember one time in the early 80s, I'd drive around at Ananda Village on a 90cc motorbike, and I had a milk carton bungee corded on the back, and I put my 2 kids in there. Now, mind you, today you'd be put in jail for doing stupid stuff like that. But anyway, so I pull up to what we called Pubble back those days, and with my Irish cap on, and you know, the kids. And Asha came out of the building and said, "You know, you're really unique." and it really had nothing to do with me, but what I'm saying there, and this is what Swamiji would comment on, when we go to and live more in our center, we become and we express who we really are. And then our contribution to not only our own spiritual life, otherwise we wouldn't be here, but okay, but our contribution to the life of the community or Sangha then can be powerful, because we're acting from our own center. And because once you start comparing, oh gee, I should have that job, or you know, over the years we've had many teachers, and you know, one can't help but think, you know, one might be doing perhaps a better job than the other. You can't help but think such things. But the truth is, as Padma and I sometimes say to look at one another, everyone has disciples, meaning we're each here to help people in a certain individual way. You know, if you're speaking of classes, you don't, somebody may be eloquent, but not really, as Master once said of a devotee who left, he was never really with us. Another person can be sort of confused, but with a lot of heart quality, and you can't remember what they said anyway, right? But you feel uplifted, you see. So we need to understand that when we come from our center, from our soul, then we really do give and share with other people, no matter how people may judge the quality of what you do, or more importantly, how you judge the importance of what you do. That's really what I'm saying. We are our own greatest enemy in our ability to be an instrument. And that really doesn't matter. When I managed the Expanding Light years and years ago, thankfully it was a brief stint, people would say, well, what do you do here? I said, well, I wash the dishes and I move chairs. And that's why they call me the chairman. So I'm happy to move chairs and wash the dishes. Don't ask me to cook. But, you know, what we do really isn't important. It's how we do it. It's not the what, it's the how. And then we find happiness.
And one other aspect of that for me is similar to the one that I talked about earlier, the benefits of community being ego transcendence, which is, you know, Master said to Swamiji, your way to freedom is service and meditation. And Swamiji would always point out that he mentioned service first, notwithstanding the fact that meditation is central to our path, that service, selfless service, is our sadhana. It is our spiritual practice. It's not something that somebody asks us to do and therefore we do it. It's something that we open our arms to and say, yes, I have another opportunity at selfless service, which is I have another opportunity at my spiritual freedom. I remember one time Swamiji saying at a satsang in Assisi, he was talking about the principles of selfless service, I think, or it's somehow he got around to that topic, you know how he often would sort of go all over the place. But he just had this little one-liner in there, and he said, service has been my salvation. It is my salvation. in this lifetime. And that really stuck with me because, you know, I was a beneficiary of his service and extremely grateful for his service. And I was so heartened to see that he, you know, he depersonalized it, and he was saying, it's my spiritual freedom. And I think we forget, you know, we forget in the busyness of the day. But this is, you know, it's just like when the devotee sees a fault within ourselves, we go, yeah, now I can see it. Now I can work on it because I want to be free in this lifetime. So we embrace, not the fault, but we embrace the opportunity to try to transcend the fault. And so we embrace the service. And so whatever brings us together in community, to just have that be at the constant, you know, keep that thought at your spiritual eye, because that's all we're doing.
How many of you today read Jyotish's blog about Ananda Seva? Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting points that he made. I mean, we spend so much, and some of us tomorrow even, spend so much energy in classes and time on our meditations, but we haven't really developed our service, our understanding of how to render service that well. So I look forward to the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
Could you say just a few highlights about the blog, if they come to you, like about service?
Highlights of Jyotisha's blog.
Wow. As long as you never quote him to me, quote me to him. Yeah. No, he in the blog, right, he mentioned he was when his recent trip to India, it was at a satsang, and or maybe at the leaders meeting, I don't remember now. But
I think it was just a small group of them after a day in Vrindavan.
Ah,
They
okay.
came to Vrindavan and noticed how the staff of the Paramhansa Yogananda Trust, even though they had not been taking meditation classes, and that, you know, how they were being transformed just through their service, and they really, you know, they weren't necessarily disciples of Master yet, but through their service and being guided in what they were doing, they were being transformed.
Mm-hmm.
And haven't you all noticed, maybe there's a few of you even here tonight, but in all of our communities, there's a contingent of people who that's what they do. They maybe never took a meditation class, maybe never took Kriya, doesn't matter, but they show up. We have people up there in Seattle. This guy comes in and he changes the filters on the HVAC machines. You know, we've got, and this other person likes to do the roofs, and you know, it's seva is their salvation, is their spiritual path. We call it karma yoga to a certain degree. So, and as Padma likes to point out in our Kriya training classes, you know, in a 16-hour day when we're somewhat conscious, how much of those 16 hours do we meditate anyway? Really, we're mostly, and this is what Jyotish said in the blog, we're mostly in activity. And something I've often commented on is, to the as more a meditation teacher, is the more we bring meditation into service, the more service activity becomes a meditation. And at the end of the day, when it's time to meditate, it's a completely seamless experience. And in fact, it's worse than that, if you'll pardon me. If you don't do that, your meditation efforts are going to be undermined and will be at odds with your activity where you spend most of your conscious waking hours. So unless we can practice the presence, japa, etc., unless we can be mindful, lots of ways to do that, but unless you really actively seek to aspire to a transcendent, egoless state in your service and how you relate to people, your meditation isn't going to really take you very far, because it's going to be probably restless, thinking about all the things you do, and not very deep, not going to go beyond thoughts, and in any case will be offset by what happens in many more hours in the day when we're activity. So his book really is quite timely. He's shared with some of us his outline, but beyond that, it's really something I don't know why it never got thought of before. So I think it'll be really a good thing for all of us to study and share.
In answer to Shanti's question, that's what we bring to it. And, you know, Riemann touched on the other part of it, so.
Is a lack of preference in service an indication of egolessness?
I want to do that. Is a lack of preference in service an indication of egolessness?
Well, in my case, it's an indication of indifference. So you have to be careful on that. You know, I grew up, came to age in the hippie era, and like Forrest Gump, I was at a Haight-Ashbury. At Forrest Gump, I was at the Monterey Pop Festival. That's where I lived. And what we used to say, whatever, right? So you have to be careful with that. Not having a preference often masquerades for a lack of energy. On the other hand, having a strong preference obviously masquerades for ego. So you have to find that razor's edge where you put your full enthusiasm into what you do. And what's the guideline? It's right in the Bhagavad Gita, isn't it? Nishkam karma. Action without desire or attachment to the consequences of it. So it's say yes to life and make it snappy, but
you can kind of choose.
Give it to God. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anything about
I'm thinking about.
I know the look.
What I was thinking about is, you know, I had the benefit of coming to Ananda early enough in the time when Swami Kriyananda was running things. So there was the benefit of being asked to do certain tasks. And in that case, from somebody like Swamiji. But, you know, we have it. I mean, Jyotish and Devi represent that to us today, the spiritual directors locally. Shanti and David and Asha represent that. But when I was asked to do a certain job, which for me always lasted a long time, whatever I was asked to do lasted many years, even when it got really tough and really difficult and really challenging, and the little part of yourself was going, get me out of here, you know. I knew as a disciple and a devotee, I couldn't run away from it. There was no back door. It was important because that would be just my own desire and ego getting in the way of it. It was important not to listen to that voice and to just keep trying to look for ways to find the joy in it until I was asked to do the next thing. And that's been an important sadhana for me, even today. People ask me, you know, do you see yourself here? I mean, they're always worried in Seattle. I don't know if you guys do that here, but you're not going anywhere, are you? You know? Why are you going to Palo Alto? You know, people get nervous. And
it's the size of your suitcase.
But truly, you just, you know, I'm not aware that I'm being asked to go anywhere else, and if I am, I will. You know, it's not going to be my choice. It's not going to be because I want it. It's going to be because I'm asked to do that, because that way I know my ego's not in it.
It is.
was just reminded when you were saying this of the first time I thought of it, of a dream I had when I was in Thailand. It was a very short dream, and it took place in the Bay Area, and we were given I don't know how it happened, but we were given this huge property with vast resources of facilities on it. And a lot of us were gathered, and I was telling everyone, we don't have to think in the box. We can think out of the box. We didn't have to pay for anything, but we had the possibility of doing anything for Ananda we wanted, because it had so many facilities. And Padma and Hriman were there. And they were sent by Swamiji to help with this project. And they were just standing amongst the whole group of people, and they were just enthusiastic about it, and the thought throughout everybody was, this is going to be the way that Ananda worldwide was going to get out of debt in every possible way that we find ourselves owing money. And that was a dream. It was short. It was sent by Swamiji.
We're all for it.
You never shared that dream before, David.
A week and a half ago.
I didn't even tell Tricia. I never thought of it until
That's interesting.
Yeah. You know, it's I was born in a very in a Catholic tradition with a lot of the things as Padma just said, and each of us has a different karmic pattern that way. I was taught to what she just said, which is to say that, I'll put it in a more crude way, do what you're asked to do and don't express a preference, which is sort of where we started this. There came a point in my life at the village, however, when I knew from an inner sense that the kind of thing I was doing, which I just slipped into when I came to Ananda Village because it was needed to be done, happened to be a skill I happened to have. But I wasn't actually asked. Well, I was asked to do it. Okay, it was pretty obvious. But something inside, and I kept waiting. I knew it was over. And my devotee mind said, well, you have to keep doing this until you get asked to do something else. And finally in Italy, Padma and I drove down, I guess he gave us a ride to the airport or something. Anyway, we went somewhere in Rome with Swami, and we were having breakfast, and I finally put my conundrum before him. And I said, it feels like I need to shift more into, what I do now. And although I didn't know that, how to phrase that, but I knew it was a shift. And yet there was no one on the horizon at that time to take up the duties I had in what I was doing. And it was a fairly, I don't want to call it important, but somebody had to do it. And they had to sort of know what they were doing. And he basically agreed. I don't know on what level he agreed, but he essentially gave me permission, to quit and move in the direction I described. Now, the way it worked out is, just so happened, another CPA, a brand new member, happened to arrive at Ananda Village right about that time. So, like that beautiful story Master and Swami would tell about the man called by God, and he had the newborn baby, and the wife had died, and it's just a heart. He would always tear up when he told that song. I mean, that story. But somehow that was right too, because I had to take the initiative, even though my own spiritual intuition and training and samskars said what Padma said. But in that case, I had to act, and for whatever karmic reasons of my own, I had to take the initiative from that inner guidance. So you can't make too many rules on this kind of thing. Again, we get back to intuition, don't we? That inner feeling. And then, as Padma said too, to ask, in my case, I had the blessing to ask Swamiji directly and personally, but to ask those who you trust spiritually, who have your own best interest in mind, to, you know, get some kind of feedback.
Well, there's a huge, just to point out the obvious, even though you had to act on your intuition, still you put, it goes back to what's the right question.
It was a question.
Because
Yes.
you went to Swamiji with a question. It wasn't like,
I quit.
I don't want to do this.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think that's very important, even if, because of course we're all being taught to pay attention inside, but then to offer that up and say, am I getting this right, in a way?
Yes,
Yeah.
good point.
What year was that?
89 maybe? Well, no, 87.
87.
Yeah. I think the year you guys came down here.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, since David's here, I was the one person who voted against buying this community. Much to my chagrin.
Well, you could resolve a lot of karma by helping us
In Thailand.
But you visit anyway.
Father David forgave me. I confessed.
Yeah.
I remember your presentation in the Dome to all of us gathered with Swami about this idea of buying this crazy place.
This apartment complex. No, I had reservations too. But, and then we were asked to go to Seattle some 5 years later or so, or a little more. And we arrived there, and the community there is smaller, right? It's just 32 units, which the plus for that is it can be all Kribans and all members when it's that small, which is delightful. But the downside is, you know, financially it was still very, very rocky. In fact, shortly after we got there, there were serious obstacles that looked like we might even lose the community financially, because there were just a bunch of people who weren't really on this path, who were wanting to sell their interests and move sort of all at once. And Swamiji said, just keep doing what you're doing. Don't worry, it's all going to be fine. And we were just going like, we're at the edge of the cliff, you know. And just in that moment, all these amazing people, Cliff and Willow, the Contis, the Brockschmidts, all these people walked in the door literally the day these other, and we didn't know them, you know, they all walked in the day these other people walked out, and they ended up investing, and everything ended up fine. Well, I'm saying that behind the scenes because it was after that when things stabilized and started going really, really well, because we were all Kriyabans and members in community, and it became a very powerful spiritual magnet and experience that I really realized the mistake of having, you know, not supported David in his desire for purchasing this community. I understood from my own experience the wisdom of it, because it brought people together who might otherwise not be ready to move to Ananda village, you know, to change jobs, careers, states, family, you know, all this stuff. It gave them an opportunity to come and live the life that they wouldn't otherwise have had. What we were debating about, just so you know, was at Ananda village, all the land is owned by the church. Right. And in these city communities, in order to be able to have them take off, they were not owned by the church. They're investors involved. And luckily for us in Seattle, all the investors are members. Mm-hmm. And so we're really able to run it as a community, and we were able to change the ownership eventually to have it be really community run. But what I'm trying to say is that was our, you know, sort of philosophical debate with David's initial proposal. But it was still the right proposal, and it was the right direction for Ananda at that time. And I had to experience the ups and downs of it myself in Seattle later to see the wisdom of it. So, David? We're still friends.
You know, Master, talking about ministers, would say several things, but one is, does a person have the karma to do that? And what Swami would say as it relates to this topic of we'll call it just financial things, does the person have good financial karma? And, you know, that's a factor when you're in leadership positions. So does that, whatever the thing, it doesn't have to be financial, could be ministerial, etc. It's not necessarily just skills. Do they have the karma? And does, in the case of serving other people ministerially, are they able, and do they, in fact, literally minister to people's needs even when they have their own troubles, for example? So it's, you know, there's what I'm saying is that when you make decisions, both about yourself, let's say you've had not so good karma in the field of leadership or money or getting projects done, whatever it is, then you need to think twice about taking, you know, get help, get support, and so forth. So don't just look at, you know, is this a good thing to do, divinely speaking? Do I have the intuition? But look backwards a little bit, and do I have the karma to fulfill it? And if I don't, how can I find people to, you know, support that? There's also that factor that's actually a pretty big factor. At, you know, a certain point in life, you look back and you realize, you know, most of us don't change that much that fast, and so there's a lot propels us through life that has come from the past, far more than we Americans are generally willing to concede. But it's good sometimes. That's why having an astrology reading once in a while is kind of fun if you don't get too anal about it, but it can help resonate with you about patterns that you have. But to be aware of those patterns can help you make good decisions when you're embarking on something new.
And David had good karma that way.
And David has good karma.
Yeah.
What have been some of the changes, you know, in this community? Obviously we have seen since 2013, since Swami's passing, there's been just a lot of new flow of energy in terms of people.
Speak up a little.
Yes. I was wondering, in Seattle in the last 4 years, has there been significant shifts in the kind of people, demographic, quality, numbers?
Yes. Yes, there have been. Chidambar was asked.
Specifically related to Swamiji's passing.
Yeah.
Since Swami's passing.
Well, yes, very much so. Within the residential community, but it's also true of the Sangha, but in the residential community, our average age has dropped precipitously. We just had a newborn a month ago, so that really helps. We're thinking of having a rule that if you're going to be a member, you have to have a few kids. But no, we've had
more families.
Several families.
Yeah, a number of families.
A number of families move in with small children.
And we didn't have any in the community before.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And some real bright lights energetically and spiritually speaking.
The farm.
The farm, Zach and Haley. And how many of you know Zach and Haley from? Okay, many of you. Wonderful, wonderful lights. And Bhima, whose wife Bhakti had the baby I just mentioned, similarly. We must all always remember that Swamiji was age 22, 23 when he was put in charge of the monks. And God bless Swami for the fact that when we were all in that age range, he saw in us the potential we didn't see and gave us opportunities we wouldn't have risen to on our own. And so for one another, in terms of your, you know, what a person can do or not do, and, you know, to give each other the scope to change and to grow and to go through life's various challenges, yes, but opportunities. I think that was one of the greatest gifts he gave us, was to see our own highest potential when we ourselves couldn't. That's a wonderful gift.
I just want to touch on that for a minute, even though it sidesteps your question, but I'm looking at Kashama, who's in the school. When Swami wrote the Little Secrets for Children, the 4 books, some of the teachers, longtime teachers in the school, gave him feedback that it was over their heads, over the heads of most children. And Swamiji's response was, that's where I want it. I want them to have something to reach for. And I think that's so important and so relevant. And he was, it's not like he holds your hand while you're reaching. He supports you through prayer and magnetism and friendship. But you got to reach. And he reached, and Master gave him everything. And we see, Zach and Haley came to us. Like you guys here, our farm is about an hour away. We were concerned they're going to live out there. They're pretty new, brand new. Were they going to feel isolated? Would they have enough support? But they had such good energy, and they were so enthusiastic, and they were so trying to be in tune at the same time that we took the risk. And they did it, and the risk really worked. I mean, they just have turned it into a community. There's now 7 people, 2 ministers, and 5 others, including Zach and Haley, living out there full time. And they just have this magnetism. They just are drawing people from all over to that farm. The whole Camino Island knows them and loves them and so on. In a spiritual way, they're giving yoga classes, meditation class. They're getting people on the path. They teach Raja in Bothell. So there's a... Wow. Hriman goes up there to do the Satsang, Kriya Satsang group on Tuesday nights. So they have their own group, and we support them. It's a mutual support. But we took the risk, they took the risk, we took the risk, and it paid off. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
So I hear you guys just bought a bookstore, is that true?
Jai. Yeah. What else? Anything? You guys are right, it got warm in here.
If there's no more questions, I want to ask if you'll tell the story of how you met.
You each want to tell the story.
Yeah,
you don't have to, but
I'll let him go first.
All right.
I just heard this story today. I happened to ask the question. And it's just such a beautiful story about, just let you know, boy, God is really behind everything, lest we forget.
It's true. I was working in downtown San Jose after college, actually during college as well, in my profession, and was already meditating, during the Forrest Gump years, and but having been raised as I was raised in a highly organized religion, Catholicism, with priests to the left and nuns to the right, and my own brother is a priest, and so on. So I was not, you can imagine where I was. I wanted nothing to do with nobody, and I was on my own, right? Probably half of you have been there yourself. So I sold everything. I had a couple of Porsches, sold my Porsches, and I went off to India with what money I could scrape together with my college buddy. We bought a van in Germany and headed for India. Took a few months to get there. Spent a month.
Back then you could do it.
Yeah.
Back then you could do it.
Yeah, you can't traverse the route we did just a few years after we did it, even to this day. But anyway, spent a month here, a month there, etc. and then drove the length and breadth of India, and a month in Sri Lanka, a month of backpacking in Nepal. Anyway, so I was on a spiritual search, is what I'm trying to say. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really find what I was looking for, and didn't even know of Master at that time. So when we ran out of money, sold our van in Kabul, and managed to get a flight back through Seattle, interestingly, and landed here at SFO. I went to my family's home in Monterey, where they had their accounting business, and all my brothers were, or except the priest, were working there, and my sister, and came in, and I was broke. I had spent everything I had, and asked my father if he had any work for me, right? Well, he was sort of grumpy about the whole thing, after all. He says, well, yeah, I got to hire a bookkeeper, he said, and handed me a file with a bunch of resumes. So I'm flipping through these resumes, and I come across this one person, and reading, hobby, yoga. Dad, I think this is the one. So I said, can I borrow your car keys and your business card? I'll go over. She doesn't have a phone yet. And, I'll go over to her house. Well, she wasn't there because she had just lost her house in the Ananda village forest fire. Oh. She had just paid for it, didn't even move in, lost it, and said, if I have to go out and work to rebuild my savings, then why go to a hellhole like Sacramento, pardon me, why don't I go to Monterey?
Carmel, actually.
Carmel. So we hired her. Cool. And the rest is history.
Powerful resume.
It's a great story.
Powerful resume.
So within a week of returning from over a year traveling, I met Padma and got the autobiography of a yogi. Wow. And it wasn't very long before we headed north to Ananda village.
How long?
It's a great story.
How long until you had
about 10 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually
we had to
it was
save some money.
It was I went to the airport to see Swami off. He was going to India for the first time in a long time. It was 1977, and he hadn't been able to go for a while. Word on the street was SRF or somebody told the visa department that he was bad news. So he finally got a visa, and he was going to India. And I went to San Francisco from Monterey to see him off, and it had been about 10 months, and he actually at that point it had been maybe 8 months. And he just looked at me and smiled, and he said, when are you coming home? Yeah. That was...
But you know, after the fire, there were no homes and fewer jobs, and as I like to put it, and so we had to rent a little bungalow in Nevada City. And after about a year or more, we had 40 people living in Nevada City. We bought a little church down at the end of the plaza there, where we, in fact, before that, in our garage, which we bought an old 100-year-old house, we sheetrocked it, and it was famously one of the garages of the eternal religion. And we held Sunday services there, did meditation classes and things like that.
We were all in a holding pattern for housing to
because it was all having to be rebuilt
at the village.
So eventually a house came up, we sold our accounting practice. In fact, Davy Novak used to come and reconcile bank statements for us. Our first client was a non-construction company. And anyway, so eventually we got to move on to the land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how did you go to Ananda Village and find?
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to Cal Berkeley. I was 19, and an acquaintance, not even a close friend, but an acquaintance gave me the autobiography. I was I was studying linguistics, but I was taking a bunch of classes in Indian Buddhism and comparative religion. I was interested in all of that anyway. And it was an exciting time, and I got the AY. And I fell in love with it. And then the same friend, when I finished reading it, said there was a direct disciple in the Sierra foothills trying to build a temple. And if you go up, you could do work exchange and be on retreat there. So I went, and it was the old retreat, you know, the original property, and he was putting up the first temple. And that was how it began. I didn't move right away. I was in college. I'm originally from Holland. We immigrated to this country when I was 10. My parents immigrated so the kids could go to universities and have a good education, and I dropped out as it was. It was after my sophomore year I dropped out and just moved there. I just said to myself I wanted what Swami Kriyananda had. Whatever that was that he had, that's what I wanted. In fact, I remember having the conscious thought, my life was in front of me. I could do anything. I felt like I could do anything I wanted. I had good health, I had intelligence, I had good karma. I didn't want that life, the life of the world. I wanted to try it God's way. So that was it.
You know, just to piggyback onto that, I don't know how many of you may know Mercedes. She's a woman who lives in Virginia. She comes to the village.
I've heard of her name, yeah.
From time to time, and she often sends me articles that she finds interesting. But today she sent me one from the New York Times that says that Yale University offered a class. It's not called Finding Happiness, but it's like that. And the class, 300 people registered. By the second day, that doubled. By the fourth day, it quadrupled. They had to move it into the, like the Coliseum. 1,400 students are taking this class.
Wow.
I mean, just in terms of waking
They're
up and
looking.
saying what you were saying
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah. This was a smaller version of that, but we were heartened recently when in Seattle, where we live, our daughter's closest friend at Ananda's school is now a professor at the University of Washington, Bothell campus, which is right near us. And she invited Hriman and I to come and speak to her class. She had her PhD in geology or something, but she teaches environmental sciences, and she was basically teaching a course on utopias. Wow. And she wanted us to come and talk about communities to her class. And there was a room full of 20-year-olds, thirsty and, you know, having lots of really good questions about communities. It was very exciting for us. Yeah.
You know, I think we sometimes forget in our service and in our meditations that Master's work was based on the whole concept of finding happiness. Yes, he called it Satchidanandam, but in other words, he bypassed the religious theology out of which we have come. Yes, we speak of Vedanta and Sankhya and so forth, but he set the tone for it when he went to Japan for that brief time. He sort of came back with his life's thesis and had the book Science of Religion ghost written. But you know, now in society, and just as material science is no longer interested so much in the big picture as in what can we make, what we can make money maybe, but in any case, what works, whether it has anything to do with money or not. And basically finding happiness is the essence of our path and our teachings. Even if we quote the Gita or quote the Yoga Sutras and so forth, it's not, I mean, those are all wonderful, but it's really about finding happiness by going within and finding it there. That's really the essence of our teachings. It's not complicated.
And it's so needed. Yeah.
Good news. Well, gosh, okay.
All right, everybody.
Well done.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.